All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. Super happy to have everybody here today. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate for Progress. And with me, as always, is Dan Wilson. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson, and I work at Digital Primates. We do enterprise React consulting, and we curate the enterprise React newsletter. So if you're into that kind of thing, just Google it and subscribe. We never spam.
And Jalen Macy is also joining us here today.
Yeah, I'm Jalen. I'm a software developer at Digital Primates.
And we're super excited to have Kiki from Microsoft. And Kiki, I'm not going to try your last name, so if maybe you could help us pronounce that, and then also just introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Kiki Saintonge. Actually, Khalita Saintonge is my full name, but I go by Kiki. And I am a program manager at Microsoft. I work on the Windows platform team on WinUI and on the React Native for Windows and Mac effort there.
So this is super exciting to me because I've sort of been fascinated by Microsoft's work in this space. So maybe you could start by just introducing to everybody, like, what is React Native for Windows and Mac at just a high level? What does it do?
React Native in general is just a way to write native apps using web technology. And our effort in the React Native for Windows and Mac space is to use that same format and that same tech to write native applications on Windows and Mac as closely as possible. Even the JavaScript-based components do translate down into like native primitives.
And is the reason for doing this, because React Native, the reason to write React Native for iOS and Android is to get the truly native part. And I'm assuming that's the same sort of thing for Windows and macOS, right? You're using actual native UI components and such?
As closely as we can, yes. Some of them need to render, if they don't, you can create your own components with pure JavaScript. That's sort of an advantage you get with writing a React Native, in which case they'll translate down into native primitives. So you're still saving some performance, but they're not necessarily the native controls. But if you do use some basic controls that you are familiar with, like text input or text and that kind of stuff, that will translate into our fully functional performant native controls that we have on WinUI, actually, because React Native for Windows is built on top of WinUI. So.
You know, TJ and I did a lot of work with NativeScript, which is somewhat similar to React Native, and we always had an eye on the various other platforms and also have a feel for the complexities. I'm curious, how did you start this project and why did you choose React Native?
So we chose React Native because we realized that there are a lot of web developers developing cross-platform, and we were sort of serving more of the .NET side of people and the people who are doing cross-platform development there through Xamarin. And then it seemed like our only solution was Electron, which is just basically hosting your web app inside of a native window. And we're like, I feel like we're missing a little bit there, which was the connection between web development and native development. So we actually went through a large process of investigating different tech, maybe even writing our own tech. We looked at Vue at one point as well. So there was a lot of investigation there to sort of figure out what tech we thought was best. And we ended up settling on React Native just because it was the most developed. It was written by a corporation, Facebook, that was really far along in it. And we felt that it would be better instead to not reinvent the wheel and to just sort of jump on this train. There's a lot of people behind it. There's a huge community support. Everyone's really excited about it. So we could sort of jump in there and meet them, the web tech people there with that solution. So.
It's a strange choice to not want to reinvent the wheel. If I had a hat, I would take it off to you and say, congratulations. There was an article recently that was put out about Xbox for Windows app switching from Electron to React Native. Was that something your team had a part of?
Yes. So actually, those people helped contribute to React Native for Windows, our source repo on GitHub. They were our customers and also helped contribute to it as we were working on it. Office is also a contributor to it. We have some other teams, I'm not sure who I can mention, but are also looking at switching and are contributing to our repo as well.
So just to kind of drill into this Xbox app, it was an Electron app. And obviously there were some differences with the new version. Are you able to talk through what the Xbox team gained from switching to your product platform?
Mostly performance. There is a lot of a performance overhead with using Electron. that they were having issues with. They also wanted to use the same code in multiple places, which they could do with React Native. So they could run on Xbox as well as on desktop using the same framework, and they didn't have to rewrite stuff, which before they were having to do, and in some places couldn't really share code. So they were more excited about the code sharing, and I think that's a lot of what Office is excited about too, is they can code share between iOS and Windows, so they don't have to worry about trying to figure that translation out. There was also, it's easier to hire JavaScript developers than it is to hire .NET developers. So
Yeah.
we're like, oh, hey, we can expand our team a lot faster and get this up and working a lot quicker. So
They claim there's 1 million React developers. I don't know who's counting heads or feet and dividing by 2, but that's a pretty large number.
You mentioned Office. Are there like chunks of Office tools that are now using React Native then as well with this tech?
Yeah, so Office isn't like redoing everything in React Native, but there are portions of it that they want a similar experience across multiple platforms to be the same. So for instance, Word, the commenting experience, they want to be the same if you're like leaving feedback on your phone on a Word doc versus leaving it on your desktop computer or tablet or whatever. They wanted that experience to be the same. So the commenting and feedback portion of Word is being rewritten or already rewritten in React Native, so that experience is the same. So there are portions that we're pulling out and writing in React Native that make sense too.
Wow.
We did have one question come in from the chat. So we talked about some of the positives of React Native, right? Like the cross-platform nature, there are more JavaScript developers. So like what reservations did you have about the tech, or like maybe some of the challenges you've hit trying to make React Native work in a Windows and Mac environment?
And then as you're preparing your answer, we have a tradition here on the show where TJ tries to pronounce Twitch names. And if you notice, he tried to not pronounce this one, and I didn't want to cheat our audience.
Act.
10 points for you, sir.
Yeah, tell me in the chat if I pronounced that correctly, or if this is just like you made up this username by just like mashing the keyboard 2 or 3 times. That's also acceptable. Oh, AKD repeated 3 times.
Oh,
AKD. Oh, okay. So I did do it wrong. Okay.
It's an acronym. I see. Reservations we have about RN. So it's a little hard for me to fully comment on this because I actually wasn't pulled onto the React Native for Windows effort right in the beginning when we were first doing investigations. I was pulled on a little bit later. I think it was like 6 months later. So some of that stuff had already been figured out. Initial reservations about it was probably around JavaScript, since Microsoft is entirely .NET based. There was some interesting things with the debugging experience with JavaScript and the typeless nature of JavaScript. So there was a little bit of overhead both in our devs learning it and trying to figure it out, and also getting it to communicate with a C++ WinUI framework under the covers. There was a little bit of difficulty there. There's still some debugging experience difficulties that we're trying to work on. But yeah.
So kind of a similar question, like any difficulties with like styling cross-platform? I'm actually curious how that even works, like because you're styling the actual native controls, right, on macOS and Windows. Because I know like on iOS and Android land, that's kind of like some of the hardest internal parts of React Native is supporting that stuff. So I imagine that gets into like some of the more complex parts of your code base. Am I wrong there?
Yes. So that's actually a pretty heavy hitting question, because that is a big issue for us that we're currently trying to figure out, is the styling of platform controls. It's not easy regardless of whether or not you're on Windows, but in particular, Windows is difficult because our framework is not reactive and our styling method is not web-based at all. It's sort of like XML static based. So if some of our viewers are familiar with something called Platform Color, which is an API that our team recently developed to help access native platform colors on iOS, Android, and Mac and Windows, all of them, is a way to sort of, through the styling system that React Native has, access via strings native resources or brushes that change based on theme and that kind of stuff, so you can sort of theme your app appropriately. But there are other things that we're working on to try to get styling to feel better, because a lot of people coming from the Windows side are expecting a certain level of fidelity when it comes to styling controls for Windows, and they're not getting that yet. So it is something we're actively working on to improve, just from a Windows selfish perspective, but we also want to think about all the other platforms too. So it's a little bit slower than we'd like. So we can't just be like, great, it works great on Windows now, because with this community, we can't just stop there. So
yeah, the ability to just pull styles out of the programmatic parts of the application is huge. I remember about 500 years ago, I was writing a VB app that did, it was for grain commodity trading. And I thought it'd be really cool if the app, it was a VB app, like I said, had like a black theme and was kind of hackery looking. And just the sheer amount of properties I had to change, it was it was unpleasant. And I thought, I don't really think this thing needs a theme. It's just, let's just go with the default, because that looks pretty good, and it's fine by us.
Yeah. I mean, just outside of,
and one of the
sorry, go.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, outside of React Native, I own actually the theming and branding story for WinUI and UWP apps. So outside of that, it is still an issue we're trying to struggle with, because thousands of lines of resource code for colors, just colors, like not even all the other properties that go into styling controls. So yeah, it's a big space.
Yeah, and styling in the React Native land is interesting anyway, because it's all style sheet based and it's all inline. And so I'm interested too, like what it looks like when you have to consider Windows versus Mac versus iOS, if you're trying to build one single thing, and having to fork between all of the different operating systems too, to make it all seem like a native app when developing here.
Yeah, there's lots of abstraction and platform selecting going on, and a lot of like pseudocode and prototypes that people are speccing out, and I'm speccing out to try to get it to work.
It's daunting.
Is it easier to deal with Windows issues because like the Windows team is like, right next door, I guess virtually next door nowadays, than it is like on Mac? Like I'm curious, like I'm sure this isn't like a one-word answer, but which platform is easier for you to like work on, Windows or Mac? Yeah, just phrase it in one word and like,
Welcome to
Definitely
loadedquestions.com.
Yeah, right. Definitely easier for Windows, mostly because I can talk to the Windows people at any level. So like just shoot them an email and be like, hey, why is this way? I can even speak to the Win32 guys if I want to. So yeah, definitely easier on the Windows side. But we do have a subset of Mac developers, in air quotes, that are helping us out there. We have experts on the Mac side that understand both Windows and Mac, and we're talking to them and working through that. But I actually got a Mac device recently so that I could test stuff, and that was definitely a hurdle for me, because I've never interacted, besides my iPhone, which is a very different OS experience from a Mac device. I'd never interacted with a macOS before. So that's been interesting. After a while, I just pulled up the terminal. I'm like, we're just going to stay here. I'm not going to go anywhere else yet.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Do you find that the people at on the macOS team at Apple are collaborators, or are they encouraging of the product, or are they oblivious to it? What's the story?
As far as I know, they're oblivious to it, or they don't care. The Facebook people are pretty excited about the effort, and they're supporting and helping as much as they can, because they're actually primarily Mac based. So they're in like a similar situation where they recently got Windows devices, and they're their first Windows devices. So we've just sort of been sharing information between the two.
That's fun.
But yeah.
AKD is also curious if Blazor was ever considered as an option.
I believe it was. Yes, Blazor was considered an option. I know we spent a lot of cycles looking about spinning up our own thing, but once we decided that just wasn't feasible, we went through a lot of different iterations of different platforms.
And then another question about Xamarin, was that also presumably part of the equation as well, an option on the table?
We considered like aspects of it, but we wanted Xamarin to remain like .NET based, and so it was hard to sort of reconcile wanting to join the web developer community into Xamarin, because we felt like it was a little bit more of a forcing function. Hey, come learn our tech, come learn all of this hurdles to get into cross-platform development, or we'd have to start changing Xamarin to cater to web developers, and we didn't feel that was fair to our pre-existing .NET developers. So we were like, hey, let's just join another solution where both can coexist depending on your skill level and where you're coming from.
What it looks like externally, part of the strategy at Microsoft is just to be more broadly embracing of developer communities. And so there's probably some facet of this that says, well, we already service the Xamarin community and we can do more in JavaScript. And was that a concern? Are you sensitive to the community sizes or contributor pools or any of those sort of community-based metrics?
Yes, we are. And yeah, we did. We wanted to sort of keep the Xamarin community more pure and existing with what we have right now. Not to say that we don't invite them to try React Native if they want to, but it's definitely not like, now this is the new thing, go use it. We're not trying to say that at all. We're just like, Xamarin is a solution if you're strong in these skills. React Native is a solution if you're strong in JavaScript skills and web tech skills.
So we have a question about like roadmap and planned features, but I'm wondering if first, I know you had wanted to show some of this off, like show a little bit in action. So what do you think about now just like giving us like the hello world tour of like, give us a sense of what this actually looks like?
Sure.
All right, let me switch. There we go. So we should be seeing your screen now.
Yeah, so I will go through some installation. I saw your post for Reddit, and some people were asking about some interesting things like, oh, I had difficulty setting this up, or I couldn't get the file storage system to work. I actually tried to get the file storage system to work, and then I realized that we currently have a bug on that. So sorry about that. This tech is only about a year and a half old, so there might be some hitches, but I know all the developers working on it, so I can go yell at them for you.
Yeah, the people on Reddit were pretty excited about this. Hopefully many of them have tuned in. If not, they'll catch the broadcast. I'm sure they'll appreciate that you called them out when they watch the recording.
Yeah, I read it. I'm trying to stay updated, and I tried it out. So I was like, yep, legitimate. We have a bug here. I'm sorry. I will try to get it fixed. We'll
bugs in
it
software?
Looks like
Chance of a million.
I looks like it's scheduled for our next release, which should be coming soon. The fix for that, or at least it was put in that backlog, so I can ping people on that.
Nice.
So let's create a new project. I already created one just to test this the other day. And you do need to specify the template because we are not fully up to date with core yet. So yeah, just NPX. The new term, which semi-new for me, is NPX instead of NPM, because this installs a local non-global version of React Native, which is kind of nice.
Is React Native customized for your purposes at the moment? Or is it just that it's scoped to this project?
Oh, can you define customized for this?
Have you patched React Native to work better with your platform project, or is it React Native vanilla and then you're kind of just scoping it for this project?
I see. It's React Native vanilla.
Okay.
And then we add the Windows template into it. It looks like I forgot to put in it there. So I was like, I don't know what Windows Proj v2 command is. I bet.
Good for you. I can't talk and type at the same time. In fact, I can't really even type well. So my hat's off to you once again. Yeah, it's hard to do it under pressure.
While we are waiting for this, we have a question from Ronan52 about supporting community contributions. Do you support those? Like, is this an open source project sort of thing?
It's 100% open source. We support community contributions. We're actually trying to get community interested in writing some of the separate components. We're contributing to like separate community components under the React Native community stuff to support the modules that people have created, especially with the lean core effort and everything's being moved out. We're trying to follow those modules and write them for Windows as well. But we absolutely accept and support other people contributing and adding modules that support Windows as well, and Mac for that matter. As a people on Reddit, I can
Then go ahead, CJ.
No, you go ahead, Jalen.
As far as the community modules too, is there a particular running list of things that are currently supported by the React Native Windows effort, or is it any particular package that's out there that somebody can install for Android or iOS? Could that also be used for the Windows application?
So any module or component that's 100% JavaScript based can run today on Windows because there's no native hookups that need to happen. But we do have under our GitHub, if you go to the projects boards, we have a running list of the modules that we'd like to support. But also on our website, I believe we have a API parity page. That shows a list under supported community modules a list of the modules that we support and then the version that we started the support for it. So you can check that out. My computer is super loud here.
No worries. Are you a fan of the we were talking beforehand, just a fan of the regular command prompt?
I actually really like the new Windows terminal. I just haven't used it on my home computer yet. It's on my work computer, but I'm using my home computer for this. But yeah, I'm a fan of the terminal. The reason why I was using it for Mac is because I couldn't figure out how to use their UI for their file system storage. I just had no idea how to do anything. And I was like, where are my downloads? I don't know. I see them pop up and then they disappear and I don't know how to get back to them. So I was just using the terminal and doing sudo everything because I was like, yes, I own this thing. Let me do everything. I don't know.
Usually that's usually like the number 1 or 2 discovery you make on Mac is that Finder is awful at finding things. Like that's
Yeah, I discovered that pretty quickly. I didn't know what was going on, but everything was very clear in the terminal. So I'm like, I'm just going to live here and everything will be fine. So with this command, we're actually going to be installing the Windows stuff that's required to actually run this app on a Windows device. And the overwrite is a temporary thing because right now we are actually overwriting your Metro folder inside to help support Windows, which is a temporary thing. We hope we won't be able to do that soon, but it just sort of suppresses some of the warnings and asks that hey, we're going to overwrite this file. So if you'd like to know what those warnings and what we're overwriting, then don't put that tag on the end and then it'll ask you and you can step through that process. But to save some time, you can. Oh, it might help if I actually went into the folder.
Oh.
Can't spell. There we go. Now go.
And I'm assuming then if you wanted to do this for Mac, you would just switch out like macOS for Windows sort of thing.
Yep. As React Native dash Mac dash in it, macOS dash in it. There is some extra, I think, like CocoaPod linking that you have to do on it. That you
CocoaPods.
That
yes.
you don't have to do here. But so yeah, actually we are done. We're ready to do npx React Native run Windows and have the whole build process kick off. We'll see if it could do this because there's an issue, also another issue recently where for some reason, if I am using more than 34% of my RAM, then it will spike and I'll run out of heap space. So we'll see what happens. If it does, then I'll just open up Visual Studio and we'll run it through there.
The fact that you know 34% tells me you've done this. Like
yeah, I know. Well, I was testing it with my devs and I was like, hey, I have Teams running and it just starts closing everything so I can build this. Why are you spiking my memory to 100% to build something? I don't understand. So we'll see what happens.
By the way, if you talk to the Teams folks, tell them I said great job. That is really a nice collaboration tool.
Oh yeah, it is. They made a lot of improvements really quickly, especially when everyone went into quarantine. They were really pushing hard and scrambling around to make everything work a lot better and a lot faster for people. So I was actually really surprised how quickly they did a turnaround and fixes on stuff.
Internally, do you get the new like auditorium view feature thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
I do.
See, we haven't gotten that yet. I kind of want to try it out.
It's pretty fun. It's a little distracting sometimes because I'm just like, looking at everybody's faces who's talking because you can see everybody at once, which is a little weird sometimes.
For those of us who have no idea what the auditorium view is,
we're just not going to explain it, Dan. It's exclusive knowledge here.
They actually have a couple different views. They have one where it's like this huge like grid view with a bunch of people's like webcams going, and they have another one where it literally looks like seats and they're like in an auditorium, and they do like a backdrop, so they cut out so just your head. Unless you have like really crazy hair, in which case it starts looking interesting. But then they just put you in these little seats all over in this weird auditorium.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
I feel like there could be more done to bring remote people together. I mean, we have tools like StreamYard, for example, and Teams that are way better than nothing, but there's something lost in the lack of 3D-ness.
Yeah, well, and even when you go 3D, we've been experimenting with like VR tools as well. It's like another Microsoft tool, AltSpace VR, and it's a really cool tool. But it's also like the VR world it's kind of it's interesting, but it's also weird because, like, at least for me, I can only stand VR goggles for so long before it really starts to like mess with me. So it's fun for a while, but it's almost like exhausting being in a VR world, unlike like being in a room with people where it's in theory supposed to be not exhausting, I guess, relaxing.
I'm the same way. I built a game a little while ago in an Oculus, I believe, and that was nauseating.
I imagine building for it would be even crazier because you almost have to have it on quite a bit to test things out.
Yeah, I can't do VR. I can do the HoloLens. That's fine. But VR is so AR versus VR.
Yeah,
very different.
And so, what's running here? Are you building the Windows app for the first time?
I'm trying to build it. Yeah. So the first time it said that it failed to unzip a file, which I just try again, and it usually succeeds. If it doesn't, then I will open it up in Visual Studio 2019, and we will try building it there.
Did have a question come in for the chat. If any Microsoft teams are considering React Native for web, so combined with Windows and macOS, you could theoretically live the dream. Oh man, write once and target Android, iOS, web, Windows, and macOS.
Yes. So we're actually working and collaborating with Facebook a little bit on like what that means and what that looks like. But I know it's still in development, and we're a little bit hesitant to like jump in and start testing anything until they feel confident about the tech that they're transitioning over into. So we're kind of holding back on that, but it's definitely on our radar, and we're looking into it. We want it to work there because theoretically, anything you write in React Native should run just fine in React Native for web. So yeah, we'll see.
I'm curious too, how much when you actually get to like building the UI, are Windows, like, are you writing your UI code or your markup or your XML or whatever twice for macOS and Windows right now? Or is there something like I don't know, I'm thinking like Xamarin Forms, right, for example, that like is actually going to compile to both?
So I'm not sure, like there's like this HTML like syntax that you define your layout in React Native.
Yeah.
That can be written once and it'll run both on Windows and Mac.
Okay, so like the same components that are built into React Native are supported on Mac and Windows then?
Almost all. I mean, Mac is catching up a little bit because it started a little bit later. So there are some native components that work on Windows that aren't quite working yet on Mac. So we're getting there. I think it's also Mac is one version behind right now as well. So it's just a little bit of a catch up because it started later. But yeah, I mean, once it's caught up on the versions and the modules are caught up, then yeah, everything that you've imported from that module should work because the native hookups are there.
What's the plugin model
for writing your own?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking through what the native APIs are for Mac OS and Windows, and just how little I know about that. Can you kind of talk the audience through what it would be like to build a plugin for both Mac OS and Windows?
So I don't know too much about the Mac OS because I haven't written one on Mac OS, but for Windows, you do need some knowledge of C++ in order to hook up the native component. But we do have native component templates. We've written some C++ like skeleton templates for writing your own native component, in which case we've outlined things like how to hook up properties into the JavaScript layer and how to access the native components on Windows. And we have example code for that. And it's actually documented on our website how to set those up too. But you do need some C++ knowledge in order to set it up, just because that's how it hooks up to the native stuff. So yeah. I did run out of heap space. So we're just going to try and open up this
You
thing.
warned us that would happen.
I figured because I'm running a connection here that it would not be able to do it. So I'm just going to go into Windows and open this up in 2019. I'm just going to open my second monitor, so I'll move it over. Oh, no, I did open it there. Sweet.
Jalen, did you have a question?
I was just going to add on to the native module stuff for Windows. I think that's the formal name, Dan, for the when you're writing your own custom stuff, you can write it in the native language. So I did this a little bit for iOS. I did some iOS development a while back. You end up writing in either Swift or Objective-C on the iOS side, and then you can set up all your native modules that way to talk to React and talk back to the actual native iOS code to perform some more lower level operations. It's really, really neat.
And the part of JavaScript being typeless and the part of, say, Objective-C or C++ being strongly typed, is that crosstalk, that translation layer, handled as part of the React Native piece, or do you have to do that yourself?
Did she freeze up there?
Looks like it. Mine.
I was taking me a second to figure out whether we
She could be
lost her for a
deeply in
second
thought.
or like, yeah, I thought for a second she was really, really thinking that question over.
We
Yeah,
got the
she's-
35% of RAM, and
yeah.
Sure, she'll pop back in a sec.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the specifics around which needs to know what. I believe when you're talking back and forth, the native code side needs to know. Basically, when you're saying I'm sending in this type, I'm expecting it to be a string, a number, or something like that. There is a way to specify when you're setting up your properties between native modules going back and forth.
Every once in a while, I watch the JavaScript WAT video just to remind myself how much trouble there is in translating back and forth between types in JavaScript.
So my Visual Studio is like, hey, guess what? I will fix the fact that you have no memory by closing everything.
Oh, how nice of it.
I know, right? It's so convenient.
The little paperclip popped up. I see you're doing a live stream. Let me close everything for you.
Yes. So I don't know if I'll be able to build it fully from scratch. I might be able to build the one that I already built earlier, but I guess super caveat to that, I have a beefy computer.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fair.
I guess if
Doing
you're
a
developing
lot.
anything, have a beefy computer.
Totally.
So we have a couple other questions that have come in too. So question about state management library. Is this going to be just anything you're doing with React normally?
So, I mean, yeah, any sort of state management that you can write in JavaScript or in React would work in React Native as well, if it's all JavaScript based. But we are actually working on, I believe, or we recently contributed to the React navigation component so that you can support that like very common way to navigate between states in React. I know that when I first built sort of a demo for build last year or the year before, I don't quite remember, I ended up just writing a really simple, actually game state machine, because that was the only state machine I knew how to write. So I wrote that, and that worked just fine, which is just sort of a bunch of enum equivalents, and you just switch between them and re-render whatever you need. So yeah, any sort of state machine that you're familiar with should work.
So I know one question I have, then this is sort of a broad question, but I imagine your biggest, I guess, competitor, and I put it in air quotes because I mean, they're all, like open source free-ish tools, but Electron, I would say, would be the biggest thing that if people were considering what you're building would probably also consider Electron. So I'm curious if that's true. And also like what sort of things you would guide people. Like if I know like, okay, I need to build a desktop Windows and a desktop Mac app today. Like I know I need that for whatever reason. Like what are some of the considerations of what makes projects a better fit for what you're doing and a better fit for maybe Electron?
I think it really depends on how much native stuff you want versus how much you just want to host your web app, your literal website on a native device. If you want it to be in a native window, you want your web page to be in a native window, but you don't care about anything else, then Electron's a great choice for you in that option, because you literally just run your web page there, so you don't really have to rewrite anything. You just have to hook up a bunch of stuff. From my experience of it, I actually haven't used Electron before. With React Native, there's a little bit more of overhead because you do have to write some more JavaScript and some of the rewrite the experiences that you have there. But then you also get a native experience, so you get a smaller package when you're actually building and shipping the app, and you get those native performance and controls when you write your experiences. So you get whatever acrylic, any like animations that you might expect, and all of that comes into it too.
Yeah, one time TJ and I were working on a proof of concept, and we were trying to show how great having the native controls is. Remember this, TJ?
Oh,
and
yeah.
We tried putting a million things in a list in a hybrid app, and it crashed. And I think you walked it down to about 10,000 and gave up just because it wasn't really a competition at that point. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think the broader point there was like, I know, because so what Dan's talking about is we worked on the NativeScript project for years and years. So one of the things we tried to talk to developers about is why building native, like why you might want to do it, right? Because certainly like Electron is the easier option, and just straight web is the easier option. If you're coming from a web background, because it really is just taking your web app and saying plop, there you go. And I know like for mobile, like some of the controls we used to talk about were like the list view, right? Because UI table view on iOS, Android.widget. I think it's recycler view on Android. Like you can just give these things like a data set of like 100,000 items, and it like automatically handles memory management for you, and like all this stuff that like the UL on the web isn't going to do anything for you. It's gonna hang you out to dry. I would be curious, like, what are some of the examples? Like, what are some of the more common native things you might want to do? Like, what are some of the big, like, heavy hitter benefits of working with native? Is it like specific UI controls? Is it specific APIs, specific sets of behaviors?
So if you're interested in sort of like the design and making your app look more native, then you get all that basically for free. So that's super nice. There is a lot of stuff that we want to focus on once we've caught up release wise around file system storage, which is not really something that you get with an Electron app, which today that is already working on Android and iOS. There's also async storage, which is working on Windows, which is just sort of like a lighter way to access your files and systems and save data there just locally. So that's a huge bonus. Also, there's the advantage of the fact that not your entire native app needs to be, at least on Windows, 100% React Native. You can actually just host portions of your app in React Native, and the other portion can be written completely in native code if you want to. So you know how I opened up Visual Studio? That is a UWP WinUI app right there. So I can just go in and add some native code around the React Native component, and I can host basically some web content as well as some native stuff and sort of share there, and the performance is pretty much the same.
You know, to add to that, I think the juicy quote in one of those articles about the Xbox app is that the memory usage decreased by 50%, and then the install size went from 300 megs to 60. You know, that's, I don't think people think a whole lot about install size on desktop, but conversely, if Microsoft is shipping 50 million Xbox apps, it's a big deal.
Yes.
Someone's paying for that bandwidth somewhere, and your CDN and all that. And
yes,
it's huge savings.
File size and actually running size, like the size of how much RAM it takes up while it's running on the device, is super important to Xbox, especially when suspending apps and switching between things, because you want to go between your game and your like settings or whatever UI in-house app that you have. And you want to maintain a really low percentage on those lighter weight apps, which is hard to do with web-based apps because they just consume more. So that was a big issue there.
Are you saying like the settings is a React Native app on Xbox?
No, that's a native application. But I'm just saying, like, if you wanted to switch between the Xbox app they have right now, where you can search the games list and stuff like that, between that and actually playing a game, they would actually suspend that app. They wouldn't close it because they want to keep wherever you are at. And in that suspension, with a web app, you're going to consume more memory, which means that it's going to affect the performance of the game that you're playing. And that's a huge no-no on an Xbox, right?
Yeah.
That's the last thing that they want.
I'll have to, next time I use the Xbox, or my kids do, I'll have to try to think of it in terms of what is an app on Xbox. I've never, ever thought about that before, but you're right. I mean, it's a device with the physical constraints. You've got to be a good steward of those constraints or bad things happen.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's Windows too, which is easy to lose track of sometimes. I think, like, at least for me, when I move out of like the platforms I'm familiar with, it's becomes a little bit of magic of how that software actually works and appears in front of me. Like, I never really think too much about what makes my PlayStation work, or some of these other random devices that we have, but lots of times it's the same sort of tech that we're using for other stuff as well. So
just kind of like a reskinned Windows almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, one question I do have, I'm interested in what kind of video applications we could have with the Windows platform. I know I've done a little bit of work on iOS and Android using the React Native video package. Is there support for Windows for that, or is there a plan for supporting
Yes, there's a
video?
plan for supporting video. I've actually seen some of that demoed just internally. We've been testing, I think when we started testing SVGs and animated GIFs and stuff like that, we also started testing video. I think that we've shipped that module, but I'll have to double check. There's a lot of things coming in and out of releases, and it's hard to keep it in terms of like what's actually released versus what's like internally shown sometimes. But yes, I have seen some video stuff prototyped and working. I don't think it's super extensive as in terms of like video editing capabilities. I think it's just using the Windows Media Player under the covers, which is a way to play media on Windows today. But yeah, we are definitely focusing on all that kind of like general support. Any kind of control that we have today in WinUI, we're looking to support that community module or write our own for it soon.
Now I want to kind of dig into that a minute. Like last week, we talked with a guy named Zane about Flipper. Yeah, Zane Sajad. Am I getting that right, TJ?
Let's go with yes. I can't remember.
Unfortunately, I'm just not the best with Pakistani names, but the guy was amazing and came on and demoed Flipper, which is a debugging platform for React,
okay.
React Native, and all that, and just amazing. And what I found most interesting about it was the strategy behind it being a debugging platform. You know, the Facebook team has decided to evolve this platform and do all the under the covers stuff to facilitate good debugging. And they're allowing community, of course, to put plugins on top of that to scratch certain itches. And that model I've seen be very, very effective. You know, building the low level stuff isn't exciting or interesting, and it's a lot of work. And it's very hard to have a successful open source project where the community is in charge of everything. Usually you require a benefactor or a core of benefactors that collaborate on the hard parts, and then the sort of isolated or encapsulated pieces can be left up to community. It sounds like that's the same approach you're going with here, as you provide the runtimes and the platforms and some widgets or controls, and then you're opening up the other parts of it, like the more specific pieces, up to community. Is that a fair rephrase? Did I get that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't dived too much into improving the debugging experience, but we've talked about it a lot. That was probably the largest complaint from our developers was that. So I'd actually be interested to look at Flipper. I actually learned React Native through Expo, because Expo's debugging experience and just sort of UI wrapped around React Native was really, really good, and it explained what was going on to me a lot better. So when I actually went back to React Native for Windows, because Expo currently doesn't work with Windows, I was like, okay, I understand what this error is, because I ran into it in Expo, and Expo actually explained to me what was going on. So it would be interesting to check out Flipper. We are definitely trying to look for other solutions to make it better. So if there's something open source out there that we might be able to piggyback on to make it easier to develop, that would be awesome. So I'll have to watch that or check it out.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see what you think, because you can, of course, view the layout and inspect parts of the layout and the styling. And these parts, I don't know what would happen if you're inspecting, say, a Windows native app. It'd probably either go crazy or automatically be amazing. It's going to be one of the two.
Well, see, we do have an inspector. If you're just building like a purely 100% WinUI app, we have an inspector today where you can look at the tree, the UI tree. So even if it doesn't work automatically, there should be hooks there to improve upon Flipper to make it work in a similar way.
I'm assuming too that I don't think this has come up, but presumably there's no magical way of building the Mac app from a Windows device. Presumably you have to have a Mac because I'm guessing it's using Xcode under the hood and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's no way. You need a Mac device to do it. I think for iOS, though, you can just use an iOS device. But yeah, you do need some sort of in-house thing.
And then another question I have, we had some questions in the chat earlier about roadmap and such. So I'm curious the sort of things you're working on. And I guess in a broader sense also, I'm curious how you prioritize, say, like, because Microsoft, it sounds like, is using this for a lot of internal things that you're building. How does that get precedence versus like the open source nature of this versus things that like the community wants? And how do you try to juggle those different priorities?
So as far as the community stuff goes, we're thinking more about pretty much the most downloaded stuff. We're like, all right, we need to hit these things first. If these people are creating a blank app and then installing all these modules, then we should probably make sure that it works on Windows. And then after that, then comes internal requirements for certain components or modules. And then I think sort of equal to that or a little bit less is matching lean core. And lean core in particular, because there's fewer controls there, so we can try to catch up a little bit more, but also we can make each property on all the controls that they're keeping in lean core work really great with Windows.
So wait, real quick, what is lean core?
Lean core is Facebook's effort to move some controls that they felt were too platform specific out of core React Native and into community modules, so you install them separately. So they moved out things like checkbox and slider, I think, and some other things that just were different enough across platforms that they felt it shouldn't be part of Lean Core. And I think they also had some controls that were like iOS slider or something like that, or iOS picker. I think it was iOS picker that they actually had in Core, which they felt was not right to have there. They just wanted something that was truly universal, that if you were to run it anywhere would work perfectly. You wouldn't have to specify the platform via the API.
It seems like the Facebook strategy is to have a tightly defined project and let other things be. Most projects and products end up like duct tape on a dusty floor. Like they just keep collecting things and collecting more things and never putting anything down. But the Facebook trend is almost opposite of that. React is very much, this is what we do. Everything else, go get it somewhere else. May the best thing win. Or, you're welcome to have other opinions of how to do things. I find that to be very admirable because it's, as a product person, it's hard deciding what not to be.
Yeah, I'm admirous of the fact that they're just willing to just deprecate things. And coming from the Windows side, that's a huge concept for me. Just cutting it out and being like, all right, I guess it's not a thing anymore. Especially since we're just like, Win32 apps still work. And whatever you ran on XP now works on Windows 10. So there's like that sort of dichotomy is interesting to us because they're moving very quickly and they're just like cutting things like mad. And I'm like, can we do that too? So a little bit of trying to catch up there. But I do admire that fact because it is sort of pushing the platform forward and trying not to leave any broken windows, which is something that you can commonly do when you're programming. Just be like, we'll leave it. It's sort of working. People use it, but they're just like, nope, that's extra. Move it out. Fix it. If it dies off, it dies off. And it's like, all right, it's a different model from what I'm used to, but I respect it.
So we did have a question come in from chat about, can you speak to any of the technicals of why the Microsoft Store app for Xbox is so much faster? Was the previous version a web app instead of a native one? And then, first of all, the username Penguin Warlord is A+. I appreciate it. And then they followed up with, I would have expected React Native to be faster, but was surprised by just how big the performance gains were.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure all the underlinkings of Electron, but I know that for Windows in particular, it's basically just a Windows app, and then inside was a web view control that was hosting all of your Electron information. And web views are not particularly performant because they're just bound to the web. So there was just sort of that performance overhead and the speaking between whatever your web server was for where your website's being hosted through the native APIs and components and then rendered on your screen. So there's just some extra links there, whereas React Native is literally using the native code in the end. It's compiling down to a native app. So there's no worry about having to do any of that extra communication.
It's probably also worth stating that, HTML was originally designed for marking up documents.
Yes.
And apps on phones and apps on desktops and laptops were designed to be running all the time and be in the same container for a long period of time. And we've sort of forced browsers to be app containers, but I don't know how much under the covers optimization there is in modern browsers, but I know there's a lot of optimization in native controls. Going back to what TJ was talking about earlier, the fact that you can automatically have your list buffered so that it's only rendering visible layers and whatever adjacent pieces are needed for smooth scrolling. Like Electron doesn't do that. So if you have a list and there's too much stuff in it, guess what? You're going to consume list size times amount of memory per list thing, and that's what you're doing. And there's no way around it.
So we're coming up close on our time here. We got about like 10 more minutes to chat here. So if you have any questions that you've really been dying to ask, I'd encourage you to get them in now. I'll try to get them out here, make sure we can try to get through them all. So here's one to community support. Are there any plans to write additional docs and tutorials? I guess what is out there right now from docs tutorials? And I guess I might even broaden this to say, like, where would you recommend people get started, or what tutorials should they look for, find, or follow, that sort of thing?
So as far as setting up goes on our website, we have getting started with React Native and Windows. But there is also a repo called GitHub React, and these are all dashes in between these words, React Native Windows Samples. where we're actually putting in samples that we're writing. And currently we're undergoing writing an app. If anyone is familiar with the XAML controls gallery, which is basically just a huge gallery of all our controls working with sample code that you can copy paste out. So you can test it in app as well as copy the code out and write it for yourself. We're working on something equivalent in React Native for Windows so you can do a similar thing. So we do plan to, and I think on the React Native Windows samples site, we are also putting up things like how to write a native module sample examples there, as well as when we write demos for Build or Ignite, we try to clean them up and put them there too. So that's where we're putting that. As far as documentation samples go, we're lacking a little bit there. Sorry, I know I own the docs. I'm very busy. But we do want to put some more stuff up there too. I think that's where the native modules example also goes. There's some walkthroughs there as well. But yeah, we're trying to support it more. It's kind of hard because tech is changing every day, so the docs go out of date really quickly. So we're just trying to run back and forth and keep things updated. But yeah,
it's a tough job. You're not trying to actually sleep once a day, are you?
I do. I try to get at least like 6 hours.
It's right in the way of the workday, I think.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. It's a daunting challenge. Go ahead, Jalen.
Yeah, just one quick question I actually had was I thought about this recently is the web, we have the lovely super slow CSS for our transitions and all that fun stuff. So on native, is there any particular considerations that I need to make if I want to do any sort of animations on my Windows app or my React Native app in general, or is that kind of an out of the box thing that I don't have to worry about too much?
If you're using a native control, you should get out of the box native experiences. I don't think we've written in navigation view yet, but navigation view is like our sidebar with the hamburger menu where you can navigate between different windows in native Windows. And that has animations and special ways that you can actually specify on the actual control. Hey, I want you to navigate to this new window in this animation way. So when we build that module for React Native for Windows, we're probably going to add properties on that JavaScript component that allow you to specify the type of animation that you want. So there'll be like those lightweight versions of controlling that stuff. But as far as animations are concerned, I believe there's a React Native animations module out that we have been looking into that supports sort of stuff like that. So we want to hook that up to our animation systems so that you can sort of imitate the same behavior that you'd expect at the JavaScript layer, but just in the Windows version on the native layer that we're looking into. But there are probably also other things, like we've got animated gradients and all kinds of other stuff that we haven't seen in React Native, but we know that people would probably want when writing a Windows app. So we'll look into supporting that. It's a little bit lower on the priority list because we're like, we got a lot of other things to catch up to, but we definitely have looked at them. We've definitely had lots of meetings talking about animations and stuff. So
there's a rumor I just started that you guys are going to rewrite Visual Studio Code in React Native for Windows. Is that true? Can you corroborate that?
I have no idea. I think Visual Studio Code is written in Electron right now, which is interesting. So I guess from my point of view, I would love it if it was written in React Native.
Do you have a campaign of like shaming other Microsoft projects that are using Electron? Do you like send those emails out regularly?
I pitch him up. She hits home runs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually don't use Visual Studio Code on a regular basis. I actually use Atom. But mostly because Visual Studio Code is kind of slow. But I have spoken to the team that works on Visual Studio Code. And they've done surveys and stuff like that. And performance is probably the biggest complaint that people have about it. It just takes a slow load time and when you're interacting with stuff. So I know they're looking at improving that. And I think that React Native for Windows is probably on their list of like, hey, since they're speaking to us in like the context of React Native for Windows, I'm sure that they were considering that as an option, but I don't know. For sure.
You heard it first, folks. React Native for Windows is probably on their list, Dash.
Yeah.
It's on their list. I'm sure they've looked at it. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Yeah, the VS Code one is really interesting because I use it a lot, but it just seems like the boot up for the TypeScript engine is what seems to take a while. So I'm hoping that if that's the thing that really improves, then I'm all on board.
Yeah. Definitely.
So we're coming up on our time. I think this is the last question here in from chat. Daniel's desk has actually said he's doing a lot, like trying to do declarative UI in React, but also make the rest like a 3D engine, which sounds actually kind of interesting, right? But I thought this question was interesting bit of that it sounds like the benefit of React Native is you get to like choose what is React and what isn't. Because it sounds like you mentioned earlier, right, that you could do like a Windows app where part was React Native and part wasn't. So do you see a lot of people like picking and choosing like parts of this app as React Native and part of it isn't?
No, actually, we haven't really seen people take that option too much. Usually when they develop, they make the whole app React Native and then they write in JavaScript because they're JavaScript developers. So they're like, I don't know XML, I don't know C#, so this isn't my domain. I'm going to write everything in JavaScript. I'm more just saying like, hey, if you want to dive down more native, you want to have access to that stuff, that is a possibility. And then parts of it you can host. I have done that. It also works if you want to go down the level. We have something called Xamarin. Shoot, it slipped my mind. Islands. We have islands. Windows XAML Islands, which is a way to host Windows 10 apps in WPF or Win32 apps. And through those islands, you can also host React Native. So if you want to get your React Native apps all the way down, that's an option.
Wow.
But it's going to need some of that wrapper stuff going on. So,
Inception, the React Native model.
There's a lot of Inception going on. Yes.
But the cool thing is you can do that. It's really interesting. Yeah. There's probably an appropriate use case where that's the right call.
Yeah.
Is there anything else at this point you feel like we haven't covered or you want people to know? Penguin Warlord says that they fell deeply in love with React and this project is super exciting. Oh, cool. And we've actually we've had a lot of engagement here. I think people are really interested in this. I guess, is there anything else you want people to know that are interested in this project or next steps they should take?
Definitely check out the repo and see what we're working on and leave some comments. If you're already a React Native expert, definitely feel free to leave some feedback and test things out or look at contributing too, because we're up for that. We do that on the WinUI side. We have some people contributing there that we love that are external people that come in. So definitely check that out. If you're just React and you're looking at React Native, I definitely would say, hey, develop for all of them, including Windows and Mac. But yeah, we've covered a lot, actually. I remember looking at your questions and it's like, yeah, this covers the basis and we've covered that and more. So
what advice would you give to somebody who's right now downloading the project?
Have enough RAM. Clear your stuff. Yeah, don't be too intimidated by the errors. They seem scarier than they are. They're probably just to do with Metro and not connecting to the web. You do need a good internet connection to run it because it's all web tech. Yeah.
From our work with NativeScript, it seems like the first 5 minutes is really key. If someone can push past the first 5 minutes, things seem to fall in line.
Yeah, and then it's also super challenging because when all these native platforms like Visual Studio and Xcode are not known for being small, right? Like that's not the first adjective that comes to mind. So it's a challenge whether you're working here or you're like in pure native, right? Because you're going to face the same challenge if you try to go fully native in Visual Studio and such too.
Yeah, check out the system requirements fully, because I think those are actually the largest sticking point, is just making sure you have all the right things installed before you start writing your React Native app, just because there's a lot of overhead there that getting your environment set up was probably the trickiest part. Once that's all set up, then everything runs pretty smoothly. But, yeah.
I'll confess to having skipped over every systems requirements section ever, so I'll have to pay more attention.
Yeah, no, don't feel bad. I do too.
you're the problem, Dan.
Everyone says that. It must be right.
Well, Kiki, we got since we got a lot of questions, if people want to follow you, like ask any questions, or maybe they're viewing this will be up on YouTube later. So if people are viewing this and have other questions for you, what's a good place to reach out? Like Twitter?
Yeah, do Twitter. You can do @ReactNativeWindows or React Windows. Actually, I think it's React Native Windows, or just do @me, which is @Kiki Saintonge. So y'all will get to learn how to spell my last name.
Yep, and I will or at least I'll try to throw those in the chat real quick so other people have them as well.
But yeah, also check out the GitHub repo, because if you have a direct question about React Native for Windows in particular, or you're running into an issue, or you want to suggest an API, like throw that up there on the issues board. We look at all of them. So I look at them like it's us directly.
It's nice to put a face with the project, honestly. Like I feel like this is a lot less anonymous now, and I'd be more willing to put effort into contributing, knowing there's real people that are reading this stuff.
Yes, we all read it. Sometimes we don't reply as quickly as we'd like, but all of it is being read and understood and filed, and yeah, we try to get to it. Sometimes we're just like, yeah, we know, I'm sorry. But most of the time we're like, oh, that's a good point. We need to work on that, put that in the backlog. So.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. At least I found this fascinating to get to know a little bit behind the project. I think the last thing I'll mention for anybody who watched, so thanks for watching. We do these React Wednesday shows every Wednesday. They're at 1 Eastern time. Time zones are a little weird. I know we've chatted about that a little bit. If you want to be notified of every new episode, there you can follow the Code It Live channel and you'll get a notification. If you go to the React Wednesdays site, we have we just added this, a way that you can add a calendar entry so that you just get notified every time there's a new episode. So got lots of cool guests and such. But other than that, I think that's all we've got. So thanks one more time, everybody. Thanks, Kiki, for joining us. Really appreciated this.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to
everybody.
plug, Kiki, before we sign off?
I think I plugged it all. Just the documentation, the React Native for Windows. Check that out. Check out WinUI too. We actually recently launched a website in quarantine. I think we launched the WinUI website. So go check out Microsoft UI, XAML UI, GitHub repo as well.
What about you, Jalen? Deer in headlights.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right on. How about you, TJ?
I'll plug the new React Wednesdays page. I spent some time on that this week, so check it out. I just dropped it in the chat.
I find the calendar invites to be super helpful. And, once again, if you're into Enterprise React stuff, follow the Enterprise React newsletter. We will promise never to sell your email address or send you garbage.
Cool stuff. Not sending garbage is a good note to end on. So thanks.
Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye.